on mute and your videos switched off. Please note that we would also be recording today's session. Hi, I'm Anandita Vyas, and it gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to the webinar series hosted by Third Sector Partners in collaboration with our partner organizations Go Barefoot, a membership-based interactive portal dedicated for the social sector, and Catalyst, our social initiative, which prepares young women pursuing professional education for leadership role, thereby creating a wider talent pool for India and helping bridge the gender divide. Today, we will talk about different perspectives on the rise of women leadership in the development sector. The recent global events, including movements like the Black Lives Matter, have forced all of us to re-examine the issues of diversity and inclusion. In the development sector too, perhaps a systematic change is needed to create a more inclusive and accountable sector. This could mean rethinking the leadership model to include gender justice, self-care, collaboration, inclusion, dismantling biases, and sharing power amongst others. Over the next 50 minutes, we will have a discussion with our panel, who I will be introducing shortly. We have reserved the last 20 minutes to address questions from the audience, and I would request you all to please direct all of your questions to the chat box. You may specify the name and name of the panel members to whom you wish to address the question. Now, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you all to our panel members. We are privileged to have with us today Mautoshi Sen Gupta, Director with MacArthur Foundation. Mautoshi has over 26 years of leadership experience in developing, executing, and evaluating organization and program strategies with development institutions of global repute. She currently leads the India office of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. Over her career, she has led and worked with several multicultural and multidisciplinary teams to identify and execute program interventions aimed at achieving systematic changes across sectors. In addition, Mautoshi is a registered associate certified coach with the International Coaching Federation of US and has coached several leaders from the not-for-profit sector. Next, we have with us Shloka Nath, the head of sustainability and special projects with Tata Trust. Shloka leads the organization's climate, energy, and environmental work and is also the executive director of the India Climate Collaborative, a platform founded by a group of philanthropies interested in continuing to accelerate India's development and exceeding its climate goals. She's on the board of the Bombay Natural History Society, one of India's largest NGOs engaged in conservation and biodiversity research. Previously, she co-founded and was managing partner with Sankhya Women Impact Funds, India's first investor funds that focused on early stage enterprises impacting women. She is an active angel investor in social enterprises and has mentored organizations across sectors. She was also nominated for India's highest awards in journalism for her work on microfinance. We also have with us today Ratna Vishwanathan, the Chief Executive with Reach to Teach. Ratna is a former civil servant and has worked in a range of departments across the government, including audit, defense, and Indian public broadcasting. She was the CEO of the Microfinance Institutions Network, which is both the industry body and the sector regulator of the for-profit microfinance sector. She has held leadership positions at both Oxfam and VSO and played a key role in managing change in both of these organizations. Before joining Reach to Teach, she was also the head of strategic partnerships with UNDP. Ratna is a highly experienced change agent, proficient in building capacity and influencing a systems change by leveraging partnerships across different sectors. She sits on the boards of multiple organizations and even writes for the print on defense issues. Next, we have with us Sonali Khan, Managing Director with Sesame Workshops India. Here, Sonali leads the organization's educational mission in India and spearheads Gully Gully Sim Sim. And under her leadership, the organization develops and implements groundbreaking programs to reach children everywhere, especially those who need it the most. Sonali is a global advocate for human rights and for ending violence against marginalized communities, with an emphasis on girls and women. Her work has focused on promoting gender equity in education, empowerment of adolescent girls, along with ending domestic violence, sexual harassment, and early marriage. Previously, she has held leadership positions in organizations like Dasra and Breakthrough, and also sits on the board of Plan International. Sonali is the proud recipient of the prestigious Nari Shakti Puraskar from the President of India and has also received the Skoll Award for Social Entrepreneurship for her work in ending child marriage. And last but not the least, we have with us Anjali Makhija, the Chief Operating Officer with Sehgal Foundation. Anjali has over 25 years of experience in rural development, women empowerment, and governance. She plays a key role in organization development and leads the core group and management team. Anjali is a member of the Women's Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry and was a former chairperson of the Gender Committee of Sehgal Foundation. She has also held advisory positions with several organizations, including being part of a member of expert panels who develop paper on work on education with NCERT, an invited member of Right to Education Protection Authority, and UN Global Compact, amongst others. So thank you, panel members, for accepting our invitation and for joining us today. Now, to begin with the topic, according to a recent report by FairShare, approximately 70% of the global non-profit workforce comprises of women. However, 70% of the leadership roles in the sector are still held by men. In India, we are seeing that the numbers are shifting slowly to include more women in the decision-making capacity. And this brings me to my first question for Matoshi. Matoshi, do you think that more women have actually taken up leadership roles in the last decade? And are we really building women leadership in the sector? If yes, then how?
Thank you so much, Ananta. I would definitely endorse your statement to say that it is a growing trend. So if we look back to even 10 years back, the number of women leaders that you would see in the sector were lesser than what you see today. And part of it, I think, has been the fact that, has been on account of enlightened leadership in those organizations trying to encourage women to apply and move forward. But also the fact that women in general are sort of finding their space in the sector. And my personal view is that, and I would really like to say that, yes, we need affirmative action, but to be given a promotion or to be put in a position just because you are a woman, to me, does not really appeal too much. To me, it should be a case of being appreciated, being accepted for the skill sets that you bring to the role as you move forward. And I think the sector has started to recognize that. That you really that the women per se have started bringing in a much higher level of understanding in that particular way. However, even now I feel predominantly you would find women in mid-level, or probably I wouldn't say low level, but probably jobs that do not require very nuanced or high level skill sets in terms of decision making powers, or empowering them to be able to be in control of the work that they do. And there is scope for much more to be done there. And I would really look to the leaders who are present here today, and members outside, to say that we really need to open this space up much more. Look at ways by which we can have women come and take on those roles. And there is research which sort of says that the quality of work that gets done, if you have a good leader at the top, can be actually transformational. And there are good examples there. And I would definitely think that there is scope for more to move forward with this.
Perfect. Insights. I completely agree with you. Even in the we are seeing a lot of examples of women stepping in and taking on these leadership roles. In fact, even during the pandemic, if you see the countries which have responded the best manner, in the best manner, are the ones which have been led by women. So of course, women taking on leadership is definitely going to be transformational. Sonali, I would like you to please add your perspective to this as well. Do you think that more women have taken on such leadership roles in the past decade? And what is the role of women leadership in today's context, and how has it evolved over the years?
Thank you, Anandita, and completely agree with what Mothushi has said. What I will do is add another perspective to this dimension on leadership, not just in the more structured sort of job and career framework, but bring in another sort of aspect, is where all do we see women taking leadership? And, as some of us who worked with communities, and, given that I've worked largely with women, looking at very, some of the toughest issues around violence, leadership has emerged at every level. I mean, sometimes, many of us talk about self-help groups and other such, which are touted as examples. But life is full of places where there is resistance, where women are negotiating, they are tackling realities and exhibiting enormous amount of leadership, which is translating into opening up opportunities for us, is translating into enhancing our life quality, enhancing the way we care and deliver not just work, but generally how we perceive our lives and what we want to do with it. So it's really important to look at leadership in this very, very broad perspective and bring in all those women into this conversation, because their achievements sometimes in many ways outstrip and make at least me extremely humble in that sense, because many of us have had access to education, skilling opportunities, and many of these women are really out there, who put themselves out there. And when you see so many of these women from the women's rights movement, I think it's really spectacular to define leadership in some of that way. Just to add to and expand what Mothushi has said, that yes, we are seeing women join leadership. And when we see whether it's the Black Lives Matter, whether it was the Me Too, and many other such movements that took place in India, women have stepped up. So in that context, how we look at leadership. Yes, of course, it would be much more desirable that women occupy positions of quote unquote power. And I'd like to call that out, because being powerless is not effective for anyone. And many a times women have an experience and have a sense of powerlessness. But I think to have that power to not just transform their lives, but transform context and situation is very critical. So yes, women, it's very desirable that women should occupy more positions of power. And personally, I think it's been a journey for me. I'm always happy that, on my senior management, I've had more women, and often men have been the minority. Even at Sesame Workshop, it was really fascinating to do a global sort of look, and we saw that we are more women than men across the organization, which was really interesting. Now, that's an interesting trend to understand. Like, does our sector attract more women? Yeah, so that's a question I'd like to throw up. But again, do women really occupy senior positions? So that's the other part of the thing. Not to say that there's not leadership at every level, but do they really reach the top? While there are many women in the system, what happens? Do they really reach the top? And are they able to define the trajectory of the future? I think that's really very critical, and a question that I'm sure we would love to sort of ask and answer. So just to say, and one last point I'd like to make on terms of leadership is the leadership of younger women. And I really want to call that up front, because, sometimes you attach leadership to experience, you attach leadership to seniority. I think that definition needs to really change. And I think a lot of the business, some of the startup culture has really challenged this concept that younger women should be encouraged and allowed to occupy that space, and therefore redefine what leadership means across. So, just to question the concept of ageism. How do you, not to say that older women should be pushed out or that they don't have the space, the wisdom, of course, that is very critical, but how do we encourage younger women to come up, occupy spaces of both responsibility, leadership, challenging the paradigm. So I think these are a couple of things that I'd like to say, that while we have seen leadership evolve and see more women participate, define leadership across the board, and understand and acknowledge leadership at every level, even of women who sometimes we think are disempowered, exhibiting enormous amount of leadership, but also to sort of settle down and say, hey, where are the younger leaders? Where are the younger women?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sonali. I mean, I completely agree with you. It is very important to keep intersectionality as central, to looking at women leadership. And you did talk about that we need to build spaces to kind of bring the women into the conversation. Now, talking a little bit more about that, we do, of course, need to also look at where are the gaps and why is it that women are actually struggling to transition into these leadership roles. So Anjali, this brings me to my next question to you. What, according to you, are the biggest barriers that women or for women leadership in the sector?
Thank you, Ananda. First of all, I completely resonate with what Sonali said, and I would like to talk about women leadership at all levels, not at the top level alone, but at middle level and down, trickling down to the grassroots level and then to the village level. I speak about this because I have a tremendous amount of experience in working in rural areas with women leaders. So I think the first barrier, of course, is the socialization process. I'm a social scientist, and that is something which I completely understand. How women are actually put into the gender boxes, and it is so difficult for them to get out of these gender boxes, including from the perspective of men, how men perceive women, and how women are accepting of their own role only as primary caregivers or working in home. So there is this completely disbalance, and I've seen women in many organizations, and even in my organization sometimes they are not able to take on key leadership roles because they are struggling with the how to meet the balance between work life, so because it's a lot more demanding. It's a 24/7 job sometimes to be in a leadership role, so that struggle and that conflict is always there. And of course this calls for more support from men and also from women themselves, who to come out of this gender box. In terms of village leadership, I would really like to point out two major points, because we work along with the women leadership. One is, of course, education. I think in our education system, we should actually be able to tap the adolescent girls and boys when they are young. So it is very important to talk about leadership issues at that level. We have a program. I work personally with adolescent girls. I've worked for so many years on life skills education, and our education policy does not provide that framework to address these issues at the school level. So that education system, I think, is a barrier. And I know in the new education policy, the government has been talking about life skills education, and I hope more curriculum around women leadership and gender issues are addressed in the life skills education. Secondly, I think this whole issue of role models, especially in the women areas, rural areas, women are not able to just perceive the idea of leadership is very secluded to them, so because there are no role models. It's only after we start working with them and there is a pool of collective women leaders, then they think of life in their homes, that creating leadership is important. And mind you, some of them are such powerful leaders. They have emerged. They are even stronger than our team members in our office or in urban areas. But the initial trigger is required in terms of role model. And another point, last point which I want to make is regarding different departments. I see myself when I go to some departments. So when they see the head of the organization to be a woman, they feel them. If there are men, they feel very uncomfortable. They would rather talk to women. Similarly, in rural areas, when women they go, all the line departments are mostly headed by, or they are men working there. So there is a lack of space secure space for women to really go and talk about issues. And I tell them all the time that this is actually an opportunity for you. You know, when you have this group of women leaders going to a government department and asking for their rights and their entitlements, men actually look up and they just cannot ignore. So it's a tremendous opportunity here, you know. So if there is a collective leadership, I think, working with different departments. And so what is important is, of course, to give the right amount of knowledge, skills, education, economic independence to women, because all these so these together can emerge as a very strong force.
Great. Thank you so much, Anjali, for your inputs. Now that we have, heard, so to speak, about a few of the challenges that women face, I would now like to flip the question and talk about some of the positives. And Ratna, my next question would be to you. How is it that you ensure that there is inclusivity and diversity in your own organization, especially within the leadership roles? Do you feel that we are providing enough platforms for the younger generation women to actually come up and take some of these roles? And in this context, what, according to you, are some of the enablers?
Well, very frankly, within not just my organization, but I think a whole lot of organizations today, there is a definite move towards affirmative action. I mean, the previous organization that I just worked with, the UN, we have Antonio Guterres, who's made a policy that he wants a 50-50 representation of men and women. Having said that, I think there is also a need to understand that it could, if you just look at affirmative action in isolation, it tends to get patronizing. And there is a certain condescension to it, which we must really be careful to address, especially if you're looking at women at leadership roles, because at no point should it be that, somebody is not empowered enough or is not confident enough to take on that role. So I think building those capacities, and you get people who are technically very proficient, who have done very well in their fields, but still are diffident and lack the confidence of owning the space that they are working in. And I think within organizations, apart from the fact, of course, I mean, honestly, if there was a male candidate and a woman candidate who was at slightly less proficient than the male, I'm honestly saying that I would definitely opt for taking the woman candidate and making that learning gap, taking her across that learning gap to make sure that whatever were the deficiencies, she did come across them. Having said that, over the past, I don't know, a few years, we've seen that women successively have been dropping out of the workforce. So whereas, particularly in India, we had in 1990, 30.4% women in the workforce. Today, we have 23.4% women. And increasingly, you find that educated women are taking breaks from work to be able to, address issues of parenthood, and they do it voluntarily because they want to be at home, they want to rear children, they want to be with their children when they are growing up. And especially in the workspace, I think we need to, apart from the fact, of course, empowering at every level, this is a niche that needs to be addressed, especially of women coming backward after having taken that break and not being questioned for taking that break and saying, what, your proficiencies have come down, because I don't think that's really right. So somewhere that space needs to be provided for taking women back into the workforce when they voluntarily stepped out, to not even motherhood, even for other reasons, because I've seen that it becomes an issue when, you take a break of 2 years or 3 years. That's one. Secondly, I think what is the biggest problem is structural and cultural restrictions, right? And we have to engage and work with women at all levels. And I, would like to echo what Sonali was talking about at all levels, because it's not just at leadership doesn't mean at the top of the organization. It also means at the top of your vertical. It also means at the top of your team. So it's a multifaceted issue. It's not just a top of the organization issue. And in our organizations, wherever we have worked, I mean, I have worked so far, we have made a conscious effort to ensure that those skills are inculcated, right? And I think what is most important to make this happen is inclusive leadership. And if there is inclusive leadership, it's not like you can throw a bunch of people together and say, okay, you guys, you are women, and now start working together. There has to be visible commitment towards making sure that inclusion is working. And it is to be at the messaging level, it is to be at the operating level, and to consciously look at unconscious bias, which a lot of us suffer from, especially, of the fact of our socialization processes. So having said this, I think what I have done consistently is making sure that equally qualified women always do get their place where they have to be. And in fact, in almost all the places I've worked, I think at leadership levels, we've had more women than men, except of course in microfinance, which was ironically predominantly male dominated, with the entire borrowing, force being women. So that's a bit of a dichotomy where 99% of your clients are women, but the entire microfinance sector is dominated by men. And believe me, that's a very complicated scenario, because you're constantly addressing like the issues of, I work for women, I give them money, but I don't know how to connect with them. So it's a very, very strange place in that sense. So yes, all these experiences have added up to the fact that there is a need at several levels to address leadership issues for women. But especially in rural India, you'll be surprised at the amount of women who just take ownership in their own hands. They, fight bias, they fight social restrictions, cultural restrictions. And it's not that everybody who's borrowing money is just handing it over to husbands and sons and brothers. There are a huge number of women who do and become entrepreneurs all on their own with minimum, numeracy and literacy skills, and are doing exceedingly well. The fact that you have 42 million women in the country who are, microfinance borrowers speaks for itself.
Thank you so much, Ratna, for sharing your thoughts. It's actually really wonderful to hear about such inclusive policies and affirmative action as well. And I would like to talk about that a little bit more going forward. And, a lot of what we've heard has also been around organization policies. However, all of us at the end of the day, work with people. And sometimes there can be implicit bias that we all have to deal with. So here it's also pertinent to talk a little bit about how women in leadership roles are perceived in the sector. And in this context, Shloka, my next question is to you. There seems to be a perception that women tend to make tougher bosses. What is your opinion on this?
Hi, Anandita. Thank you for this question. I have so many thoughts about this one. And also, it's just such an ancient trope, it's such a well-trotted out mythology. I've often found myself believing it when I've heard it so many times, because the notion of that one horrible female boss that I had is such a staple story in the work and gender debates. But really, the problem isn't the fact that some female bosses are terrible. It's really that if you have a terrible boss and it's a man, the conclusion is that I had a terrible boss. If you have a terrible boss and she's a woman, the conclusion is I had a terrible female boss. So female bosses are terrible. No one sees a bad male boss as a reflection on all men everywhere or emblematic of male leadership capabilities. But you bring up women at the head of the table and every bad female co-worker or supervisor suddenly becomes exhibit A for what is wrong with female bosses. And I think it really points to a larger issue, which is that there is a lot of pressure on female leaders to be everything to everybody. Exactly what every woman imagines that she wants to be or to see in a senior woman. And that's a really heavy set of expectations to carry. And I think senior women get pretty tired of it. The tension between the expectation that a woman be rational, capable leaders, as well as emotionally sensitive caretakers and your BFF, I mean, it's a really palpable, friction. And while it comes from the broader culture, it takes a lot for an individual, let alone an organization, to address it and counter it. Not to mention, when we do succeed, we're also considered less likable, while the inverse is true for men. Successful men gain in likability. So to give you an example, in one very often quoted study, students were made to evaluate the story of a really successful entrepreneur. Half the time, the entrepreneur was described as Heidi, and the other half, the entrepreneur was described as Howard. And even though the stories were completely identical, Howard was perceived as more effective and likable, while Heidi was deemed selfish and less desirable as a colleague. So you understand sort of how ingrained these biases are. I think something that gives me a lot of hope and has really sort of turned that stereotype on its head for me is one of the most sort of fascinating studies that was conducted actually by the Harvard Business Review a few years ago, and it came out on women in leadership. And what they explicitly said was that most stereotypes would have us believe that female leaders excel at nurturing competencies like developing others, building relationships, and many might put sort of exhibiting integrity and even engaging in self-development in that category as well. And in all 4 cases, the data was true. Women did score higher than men on these qualitative points. But women's advantages were not at all confined to traditionally what is perceived as women's strengths. In fact, at every level, more women were rated by their peers, their bosses, their direct reports, and other associates as better overall leaders than their male counterparts. And the higher the level, the wider that gap grows. So specifically what it's saying is that at all levels, women are rated higher in over 12 of the 16 competencies that go into outstanding leadership. And 2 of the traits where women outscored men to the highest degree were taking initiative and driving for results. They have long been thought of as particularly male strengths. And as it happened, men outscored women significantly on only one other management competency in this survey. And that was the ability to develop a strategic perspective. Now, can you imagine why women were viewed as less strategic? It's actually an easy sort of question to answer. And the reason is that top leaders always score significantly higher in this competency, but more top leaders are men than women. So men would score higher than the aggregate. But if you measured men and women in the top management on that strategic perspective just equally, the relevant scores were the same. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that in the course of my career, the majority of most of my committed mentors, champions, door openers have all been women. I've had great female bosses and I've had great male bosses. And I've also worked for complete and total jerks. And the jerks have been fairly apportionate by gender. I've worked for more male jerks than female jerks. But I've also worked for more men generally. And I think the last thing that I just want to end on is that, you know, even as someone who considers herself a professional promoter of gender equality, I have caught myself making unfair and gender influenced assessments of my superiors. You know, I have often sort of seen an email and said, oh, the tone of her email was off, but his email was very direct. And I think the trouble with battling these sort of really insidious forms of unintentional bias is that most of us think we're fair-minded people who don't let things like gender or skin color or age or any other factors influence our assessment of other people's skills or characters. But that's not really the case. So what really needs to shift is our awareness and our individual commitments to checking in and taking a step back to assess our own thoughts. That's how we're actually going to come over institutional as well as unintentional bias. Back to you, Anandita.
Thank you so much, Shloka. I think you made some very, very interesting point. I mean, of course, you know, we are, unfortunately, we all do deal with these kind of stereotypes, and which is what brings me to my next question as well. And Sonali, I would like to hear your thoughts on this. I'm going to take it one step further from the, you know, sense that women need to be tougher or women are tougher bosses, but we also get to hear about the need for power dressing, or that women have to be more assertive, and they have to put in a more assertive front, or which may even be construed as being aggressive. So do you really feel that leaders in today's world really need to adhere to some of these stereotypes? And what are your opinions on this?
Yeah, that's really a fun question for me from many perspectives. You know, before I answer the question on power dressing, I think all of us as women have faced or somewhere been sort of asked this question or have concerned ourselves with this, that women are judged a lot by the way they dress. And especially if a woman is harassed, they'll always ask the question, how was she dressed, right? Was she wearing skimpy clothes? And never the intention of the harasser. So dress and women in many ways are very intricately and interestingly connected, even before we reach the power dressing question. And I'll just begin with a very funny incident. So I don't color my hair, right? And it's not that, and many people ask me this question, but you know, I've had the most random question asked by a taxi driver in Mumbai. And not only did he ask me about the fact that I didn't dye my hair, but he also went ahead to give me a recommendation, and he thought I didn't know. So he said, you know how beauty parlors have all of these amazing dyes and colors that I could use, and I just needed to go to a parlor. So if you call about dressing and appearances, it's really, it's quite amusing, the kind of stereotypes, the kind of expectations that, and the kinds of images that women need to break and challenge. Coming in from the not-for-profit sector and always having a very strong political view on dress, is that I think we should dress how we are comfortable. I mean, I would just be so political about this because sometimes the sector itself is very condescending. I mean, if women come in and they're younger women who like to wear skirts, shorter skirts, or maybe sleeveless dresses, we ourselves will say, oh, if you're going to a village or somewhere, you know, make sure you dress like this. So we ourselves put a lot of restrictions on ourselves on how we should dress. So, you know, when this question was put to me, and I was thinking of, if you think of power dressing and you think of some of the techies from the Bay Areas, and Steve Jobs came to my mind, who always wore a t-shirt and never bothered wearing slippers as well. So, you know, I think we as women need to just challenge what is, you know, what is expected of us. And I think what Shloka just said, if you are a woman boss, you have to play a certain role, you would have to dress to a certain look, to be able to exercise your authority if that's expected. So I would love to challenge this. I think we should just do what we are comfortable with, you know, and that should be the way we look at leadership. I think that's how it is. Power dressing is not going to add or take away. And even if we feel like, you know, sometimes you feel, oh, dressing in a particular way will create an image, if the first impression counts, we have to play our role. I think a lot of the sectors have pushed this down, and I would just say and want to challenge this, because from where I've come personally and what I've seen happen with women and the way they dress and how that really either makes people very judgmental. So really, honestly, this is a fun question as I put it, but you know, from a very personal perspective, I think I don't in any way say women take care of themselves. They are proud of how they look. And sometimes, you know, there used to be the reverse view. Women shouldn't use makeup if they're these powerhouses, women who are in positions of power. My God, does she have time to put makeup? Like, if they love makeup, they should absolutely put makeup. You know, you can use blushes, eyeshadows, whatever you like. If you like lipstick, perfumes, please go ahead and do that. I think it's really critical that we define how we look. Because if you wear more makeup, you're criticized. If you don't wear makeup, you're like a, you know, like the Jhola Wala and whatever, you know, like the, you know, the NGO type. If you do something in a particular way. So in whatever way, women get judged. So I think it's for us to just be comfortable and do what we like and think, you know, I think that should be the tonality.
Great. Thank you so much. I mean, thank you for your thoughts about the stereotypical role that, you know, women are cast into even today, and how there is judgment regardless of what one does. You know, earlier we did hear Ratna, you talking a little bit about affirmative action, and I would like to explore that a little bit more and understand your thoughts on affirmative action. And as a policy, how have you been able to kind of implement this or see it being implemented in the organizations that you've been associated with closely?
So, okay, upfront, I'd like to say I do support affirmative action. Definitely because of the fact that, you know, of having been left behind by so many conversations, there is a need for affirmative action. And I know there are a lot of opinions out there that it needs to be based on merit, and it doesn't have to be just about gender, all of that. But having said that, the gap is so wide that, you know, for it to be an equal playing field, there needs to be a certain amount of affirmative action to bring women on par. Having said that, I don't somehow support ideas of reservation. And I'll tell you why. The main reason I do not support the idea of reservation is there is immediately a tendency to start patronizing people, saying, oh, so she's not really meritorious, but she's come through the reservation route, which is why I've always had great issues around saying, oh, 23% reservation for women. I think women are extremely capable, learn very quickly, and by virtue of the fact that you are actually in charge of families, whether it is acknowledged or not acknowledged, you are making critical decisions, no matter how invisible they are, from the very beginning. So how in any way do you need to be patronized? You don't. What you need is the rightful place, and that be given to you. And for that, I think the kind of affirmative action that both the public sector, not so much the public sector, but I think consciously the private sector. But having said that, strangely enough, Anandita, in the public sector, there is no gender bias in terms of something like wages. It's a role. Your pay scale is linked to that role, and it is immaterial whether you're male or female. Right. And I think that's a brilliant thing, because straight away, although of course there are cultural biases and social biases and all of that, and you meet them at every stage. And like I think Sonali said, if you dress in a particular way, you will face a certain amount of bias. If you don't, you face, that is a different issue altogether. But the very fact that there's parity there, I think is something really working at organizations when they are taking on women, because somehow the fact that you will, and the fact that you will get maternity leave, all of that is catered for. In the private sector, it's the bare minimum. It's about what the Indian Maternity Act says, and that's it. Whereas it isn't that way with the government. And I really appreciate that, having seen both sides of the table, right? And somewhere we need to see that, I know how we can make life more, what shall I say, conducive for women to be a part of the workforce, and not penalize them for taking maternity leave, not penalize them for taking leave to look after their children, but rather help and endorse that particular point of view and strengthen them further, so that they come back energized to, work and contribute in every way they can. And I think somewhere, in some ways, this pandemic has taught us something. The fact that all of us are not running to offices every day and are sitting at home and working pretty efficiently does make a case for people who then can't come into office every day for whatever reason, being at home and working, right? And except I think maybe the construction sector or those sectors where you require a people presence and a people touch, it pretty much has taught us that you can work away from a dedicated brick and mortar workspace. And I think that is a case where it should be leveraged to then make it a more inclusive place for women to be a part of the workforce. And this learning is a really important learning and needs to be appreciated and, kind of looked at beyond when the pandemic starts settling down. That's one. Secondly, your question as to how do we enforce it in our workplaces, like I think I've mentioned it earlier as well, the fact that you look at, candidates and you see that there's a, 1920 like difference between male and a female candidate. So there is a tendency to take on the female candidate to balance the, the recruitment that has taken place in the organization earlier. But to do this very sensibly, not as a knee jerk, that, I have to replace everybody that leaves with a woman. No, not that way. Do it in a balanced and in a measured way, so that you add value and you also, in a way, give value to the person you're bringing on board, rather than making them a token. So I think that's really important to continuously display commitment and not just talk about inclusion of women in the workplace. And this has to be consistent messaging. You have to consistently demonstrate it by action, and especially at a leadership level, it's important that it consistently is displayed through action, because only then people start taking, the whole aspect of gender inclusion seriously. And I think defining behavior at workplace policies, for instance, and enforcing them in the right way. builds culture, and these are some things that we should look at as, you know, good practice to inculcate. It's difficult, it takes time, but then it's not impossible, and it happens, and I've seen it happening. So over to you, Anindita.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ratna. I think you made some very, very interesting points, especially, you know, the point about the organizations and workspaces committing to actually looking at bringing on board more diversity and inclusion. I think that's most important in this context and in the current situation as well. Motashi, I will like to, you know, address my next question to you. You know, how, in your opinion, can women actually increase their visibility and influence in the workspace?
Thank you so much, Anandita. This has been such a rich discussion, and in fact, I'm learning a lot as well. But to your question, I will sort of quote an incident in my own career when I joined as a management trainee to in a large business house as such. One of the things that sort of came as a shocker for me 3 months down the line was basically my male counterparts. I mean, I was a management trainee myself, and my male counterparts who had equal or similar qualifications as me and were selected through the same process sort of seemed to get much more visibility, much more space, because they made sure that in the evening they were there with the boss till 8:30, 9, 10. And I, for the life of me, could not really figure out to start with that you start a day at 9 o'clock. How am I expected to? And frankly speaking, I did not want to stay on till 9 o'clock to discuss even inane things like, you know, a game or of cricket or whatever other more attractive issues of discussion could have been there. You know, so I wanted to have a balance in my life. And but the fact that you did your job, sat on your desk, figured out your tasks and did them competently, did not get you brownie points. The brownie points actually went to folks who made sure they came into the office at around lunchtime, you know, waddled around the office through the early afternoon, and in the evening made sure that they were spending time with the supervisor for long hours. And that is how they got the brownie points. And that really was put me off from the private sector for quite some time, I have to say. Thankfully, we don't, at least I have not come across similar situations in the in this sector as such, and that's something that I feel extremely good about. But in terms of, you know, unpacking your question, I think there are two elements to this. Well, the first element I would say is the individual herself, in terms of figuring out, you know, what would actually be a useful role to um, latch in. And I don't think, I'm not saying this in any pedantic way per se, because I think women are smart enough, intelligent enough to make that out by themselves. In terms of being able to bridge that gap of saying, okay, fine, how can they be present? How can they be, they be able to contribute to the discussions which take place as an equal member, if not a superior member of the team that they are participating in, and taking in opportunities like that. But I think a big part of this, the second part of my thinking is that, you know, the big part of it is also on the organizational leadership to make sure that these voices are heard. And I'm not saying literally in a patronizing way or in terms of, you know, sort of saying, oh, we have to hear the lady in the room. But in terms of just making sure that, you know, the organization has policies, has practices in place, or at least, you know, encourages competencies among supervisors and among team leaders that enable proper participation of women. The framework of reference, you know, the framework of participation, of visibility, I think can be quite different for a man and a lady in the room, and that doesn't necessarily have any impact on the outcome in terms of the work they individually do. They can do it very well themselves, but to be able to relate to different frames of reference, to say, okay, maybe some more flexibility is required with an individual than another one, or in terms of saying that, you know, could be a lateral interpretation to what we are trying to gain out of this whole process. You know, encouraging thought processes like that, thinking like that, would be great, really. And to me, I think it would be really good, just as you have this good places to work in. I think if you actually got out rankings to say the best, most inclusive places to work in, the organizations who really go out of their way, and leadership who go out of their way to say, yes, it is important to hear people on the desk. So I think to actually pull out a woman to say you need to be more visible probably can actually, you are trying to demean her own set of competencies, and which may necessarily not be the answer to what we are trying to achieve. So it is very important to make sure that you are actually giving that space, and this has to actually come down right from top leadership to each and every team leader. It is not something specific that one individual holds, and or it is the role of the HR. No, it is not just the role of the HR. This is a fundamental value that I think needs to go in everywhere. We need to be um, an organization that listens, that sort of makes space for others to participate. If we are closing down those spaces of conversations or interactions, it's not the person who is at fault, it is the organization as much. And more than a fault finding syndrome, I think the organization ends up losing the opportunity to engage with a really rich resource who they have identified as as the best individual to perform that role, and try to get on to lines of work which may not be so fruitful.
Great. Thank you, Matashi. I agree with you there that the space needs to be carved out more than it being the individual who has to worry about the visibility. Anjali, I would want to address my next question to you. And I know that Sehgal Foundation works a lot with women at the grassroots level, works very closely with the community level. So what are some of the frameworks that you are initiating to kind of encourage gender diversity? And how have you been able to kind of enable women to strike a work-life balance?
Yeah, thank you for this question, Anandita. Actually, see, I joined this organization about 20 years back, and gradually I kind of climbed up to that ladder. And the first program which I started was on life skill education with adolescent girls. And since then, all the programs of the organizations, they focus on women leadership, be it water, because water is a subject very close to women. They are handling water in rural areas. Be it agriculture, women farmers, they are not actually recognized as women farmers, and they have a key role to play. We have set up women leadership schools in villages where women are given information and knowledge about various entitlements and governance programs, and also digital awareness and life skills. So that is actually a part of our gender policy. We have a gender policy in place which has two focus areas. One is, of course, program areas, which I just mentioned, and second is the institutional framework. So where we follow a very loose and tight policy, if I may say so. That is the culture of our organization. We are very strict on principles, but very loose in operations. So a person has to predefine his or her deliverables, and a person is given a lot of power and empower, to set their deliverables, and freedom of work is there, and accountability is then there lies with the individual. So that gives a very conducive environment, especially for women to work. And then, of course, we have policies like, we have flexi timings, work from home policy, and simple things like, when I joined the foundation 20 years back, and we had this women workforce, and, mobility was a big problem because, villages are far off and they were not able to travel. So what we encouraged is, we encourage them to buy scooters, and we now also provide loans to the grassroots team so that they can drive. And now we have all our women, most of our women workforce, they drive their scooters. So there's this great sense of empowerment and leadership among the village, and it's very gratifying to know that. So the gender policy is in place, and also we try to promote a lot of role models, especially grassroots role models, people who have really come up to that level. We send in nominations to CII, FICCI, and a lot of our women leaders have got acknowledged and recognition. And also at the middle level, I think, it is so important that people get involved at the strategic level. I see a lot of potential in in some middle level management team who have a lot of potential to contribute to the strategic decisions of the foundation. Our aim is to give them more authority and more responsibility, and to have a conversation how they can take on more leadership role within the organization. So it's always important to identify these women leaders and see how, you give them personal attention, you give them a push, and see what kind of support they require. And the last point I want to mention is about gender training, which is very, very important in the organization. When we started this gender training, there was a lot of resistance among the men, especially in our field team, and even in our core team, because this is something which they did not perceive as important, So it is so important to undertake that training and just have a dialogue about the gender stereotypes and the roles played by both the genders. And this has really tremendously helped in supporting the women, especially the women in the field team, so that they are provided a safe and supportive environment to work. Yeah. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Anjali. In fact, Catalyst and Third Sector Partners are also both completely women-driven organization. And in fact, Catalyst was set up with the, intention of empowering young women through the pursuit of professional education. And through the initiative, we have, been able to look at girls who are most probably, the first generation learners in their families. And they are now taking on roles in MNCs and corporates, even in the civil services now. So, we do understand the importance of mentorship, role model, and being able to kind of provide the right platforms for the women to actually achieve their own potentials. And
wonderful.
And Shloka, talking a little bit more on the mentorship piece that I mentioned, do you feel that organizations are actually doing enough to carve out a space for mentorship, or is it still mainly the responsibility of the individual? And in your own personal life, who has been your role model in shaping you into the leader that you are today?
Thanks, Anandita, and congratulations about Third Sector. That's pretty amazing, actually. And I was also going to say, Sonali, I think you look fantastic. And I'm so glad you are doing what makes you happy. I hope you gave the taxi driver some tips on how to drive his car before you got out. But it's quite a classic story, and I can imagine what you must have felt like in that moment. Anandita, back to your question about organizational mentorship. I think there are two things that come to my mind. So many CEOs right now who are making gender diversity a priority, either by setting, aspirational goals for the proportion of women in their leadership roles, or they're insisting on a diverse slate of candidates for, senior positions, or they're developing, mentoring and training programs. I find that they are very frustrated because they say that they and their companies are spending time, money, as well as a lot of good intentions on efforts to build a really robust pipeline of upwardly mobile women, and then nothing much is happening. There are no results that they are getting out of it. And the problem really is that with these leaders' approaches is that they don't often address the really fragile process of coming to see yourself as well as to be seen by others as a leader. So becoming a leader involves much more than being put in a leadership role. It's not just about acquiring new skills or adapting one's style to the requirements of a role. It really involves a fundamental identity shift. And so it's not enough to sort of identify and instill the right skills and competencies in women as though we exist in a social vacuum. You actually have to support a woman's motivation to lead. And you have to also increase the likelihood that others will recognize and encourage her efforts, even when she doesn't look or behave like the current generation of senior executives. So it's really all about how you integrate leadership into one's core identity. And this is particularly challenging for women because we have to establish credibility in a culture that is deeply conflicted about whether or not when and how we as women should exercise authority. So what I'm really calling for, and this actually comes down to perhaps more of the individual responsibility piece, is I'm really calling for more than mentorship. You know, we need the support of each other at a fundamental level that goes beyond mentoring. I think a more accurate term is sponsors. You know, so I'm really advocating for colleagues inside organizations who will speak up for others, who are prepared to be more than a mentor. You know, be their agent, be a committed advocate. Mentoring will not be enough to ensure that you're going to get the promotion or the raise that you deserve. We need more sponsors. And we all have a responsibility to ensure that diversity exists. Every single one of us has to pause and say, let me help you on your path. Let me bring you forward so that this gender gap eventually goes away. And I'm so heartened to hear every single one of the women on this panel, because they do this every day. I can tell how it's woven into their DNA. And I can tell that because they are all adept at listening to and making others feel heard. You know, every single one of us on this panel has referenced something that the other has said. But I also want to say that it's the responsibility of the mentee to seek out mentorship as well and to stand up for themselves. Men will often apply for a job when they meet 60% of the qualifications, while women will always feel that we need to meet 100% of those qualifications. You know, and I completely fall into that category. When you look at the discrepancy between the number of men that will ask for raises versus women, I mean, I fall into that category as well. So there's a lot of work that we have to do individually as well, you know, not just as mentors or sponsors, but also as people who are seeking mentorship. In terms of who's been my role model to become a leader, you know, hands down, my mother. She's absolutely the most incredible, daring, intelligent, and compassionate woman I know. She takes life head on and with a sense of humor. And she's taught me everything I know about the value of grace in your life and a good laugh. So she's my role model.
Great. Thank you so much, Shloka. I mean, I'm sure that has resonated with each and everyone here. You know, it's also gotten us to think about our role models, our mothers, and what are some of the things that we've taken away from those, you know, experiences. And you also spoke a lot of great ideas, and for our audience to kind of think about positive mentorship role or sponsorship role, however you may want to put it, how we can all go one step beyond mentorship at this point in time. And, you know, we have actually heard very, very exciting viewpoints coming from the entire panel today. And I'm now going to pose my last question for the session. And my question would be open for all the panel members to answer. What advice would you give to all the young women out there who are looking to take on more decision-making and leadership roles? So maybe we can start with, and who would want to start? Let me put it that way. Matushi, would you like to go first?
Okay, thanks. So I would just say two things. One is to give yourself a pat every morning, really, to say that you're doing great, and you know, staying on the course and persevering and making sure that you're present for the discussions and considering yourself to be an equal member, really. I mean, a lot of times the system seems to push women down to say that, you know, you are a lesser citizen, which is something that I think, and we, over a period of time, I think you end up believing in it. The pressures are much more in terms of that. So I would definitely ask you to challenge that conception and move forward and do your best. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Anjali, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I have 2 points. One is, of course, I think it's always important to operate from the space of strength rather than from a space of weakness. You know, so rather from the space of being oppressed and later on to become an oppressor. No, it's not about oppressed and oppressor, but we have a lot of strength. I think it's very important to be in that space. Secondly, I want to mention is that there has to be a learning curve. So, in this position, it's always good to broaden your skills in terms of knowledge, in terms of participation in the strategic exercises, the vision of the organizations, and to enhance your skills, because that's how you move forward. It's so important to learn and ask for support wherever required, and whatever skills you have, you have management skills. I think all women have management skills. We actually need to demonstrate it at a professional front, and we have a great opportunity to demonstrate it. So this is a ground for us to demonstrate our strength, and I think we should take it from there.
Perfect. Great. And before we hear from the rest of the rest of the panel members, I just want to remind everybody that after this question, we will actually be taking a lot of audience questions as well, because we've been receiving, a really, really good set of questions. So we will be addressing and posing those to the panel members as well. Just continuing with the previous discussion, Shloka, would you like to go next?
Sure. Actually, my advice is quite short and sweet. It's, be bold, proactively manage your own career. Don't wait to be seen, present yourself, push yourself forward, and dare to be different. Because if you end up in a leadership role, it will be because you took risks and because you said yes and because you took on challenges.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Sonali?
So thanks so much. And I think first, let me just thank everyone that is on this panel and many more other champions, both men and women in my lives, because I think just having that affirmative environment really encourages a lot of us to be who we are. Never discount that. So I think while we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be the leader, but just to say that to encourage leaders is equally important. So I just wanted to make that as a point. And just to say two quick things, that to occupy the stage is quite easy, but to hold on to that is really tricky. The devil is in the detail. And sometimes leadership is a little more, can I say, boring. Yeah, you have to do a lot of little things, plan, prepare, read your documents, do all the prep work. It takes a lot out of each one of us, and sometimes it's mundane. I didn't want to end the discussion with this, but it always amuses me because sometimes we have this image of a leader, and then it makes it also inaccessible. That only this kind of a person can be a leader. She's so articulate, she can do something. Not to say that she doesn't have to be brave and bold, because everyone can be brave and bold in very, very invisible ways. And I think just to acknowledge that leadership is accessible to every woman. And I think that is really the core of leadership. It's not about visibility the way anyone else would like to define it for me. So just to say that is, I think if I was to sort of give advice, is to say that, yeah, leadership is all about the hard work.
Perfect, perfect. And Ratna, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Anindita. I think leadership for me, would be really important in terms of people who are coming on and taking on leadership roles, is about being empathetic. I think one of the key essences of being a leader is about empathy. Because at the end of the day, it is people who make institutions, and women who are in positions where they can lead by being nurturing, by being kind. I think kindness is a virtue that is completely overlooked and looked at as a weakness, but I think it's one of the strongest things that you could possibly have. So nurturing, kind, and most importantly, listen. Because if you're not listening, you will never make a good leader. If it's only about you and what you want and you go on talking, it's never going to happen. So that's one. The second thing is, be comfortable in who you are. You do not have to be a man. You are a woman, you have your strengths, you have your style, you have your way of doing things, and that's brilliant. And the only person you need to better yourself against is yourself. And certainly not anybody else, and least of all another man, because the visibility is that men are all the leaders. No, you make a much stronger leader by being intuitive, by being gentle. It's not always about aggression and power. It's also a lot about grace and strength, right? So for me, that is the advice I would give, that lead with your heart. It's not always about the head.
Perfect. Perfect. Great. That's some really, really sound advice from all of you. And I'm sure our audience would also agree with me here. So like I said, we have questions from the audience pouring in. So I'm actually going to dive right into that. And I will pose my first question. Mautushi, if you could take this on. Studies have shown that diversity improves creativity, job satisfaction, and employee performance. The rise in women leadership has been steadily growing. However, the inadequate number of women in organization leadership roles is an actual problem. There are many reasons which can range from gender bias and discrimination to the type of organization culture. What strategies do you suggest to further improve and balance this challenge of diversity?
So I'll quote from my personal experience, and also with the foundation that I currently represent in India. Um, it's absolutely a core value. I mean, there is, in terms of keeping the workspace as a space which is inclusive, which actually sort of rewards diversity rather than the other way around. So all our policies, in fact, are seen through that lens as to how do you actually promote equity and looking at inclusiveness as you move forward. So it's ingrained right from the point of recruitment, where in fact there is special attention put in to say that you have a diverse enough pool of candidates. Yes, you have a set of technical qualifications, yes, but also looking to make sure that you have enough representation from different groups of people when you are looking at the shortlist or the pool that the consultant actually brings to board. Starting from there to the point of induction, to the point of building in competencies for the individual, and execution as well. So in terms of what has happened is that there is almost a zero tolerance sort of situation, and I can say this in within MacArthur Foundation, people have lost jobs when they were seen to be non-inclusive. People who are otherwise technically really qualified, and in 3 years back, all of a sudden you get a message saying so and so has left the organization, and the story was about not being inclusive enough in their work approach. So it requires a lot of support from top management and senior management as well, to say that this is absolutely central. We are not going to compromise on this one, no matter what we are talking about. It meant that that particular team where this individual was actually a key member had to go without a capable and a competent resource for the next 6 months till the next recruitment took place. But it was absolutely essential that we said, no, we are not going to compromise on our basic values and our the core pillars that keep us up as an institution as such. So I think it is an organizational value, it's a mission value, and in fact I would invite senior leadership, top leadership, to actually visit this on a regular basis. So if you are looking at outcomes for an individual, to say that these are the job objectives, you also need to look at the process that the individual employs or deploys within the team and externally to be able to reach those outcomes. So it's not just about quantitative outcomes to say such and such person has actually met these 5 goals, really a super achiever. Yes, but it also needs to be seen from the point of view whether the person has been a good leader, has been a good team worker, to be able to give space to everybody. So I think it's a mix, really. It is the individual, yes, but also a lot to do with the way the organization chooses to imbibe this as a core competency.
Great. Thank you so much, Mautushi. Ratna, my next question is for you. There is a mandate to have at least one woman director on company's board, but many organizations don't, because there are also not many women who are capable to take on these roles. So how do we address this dichotomy? This is coming from one of our audiences. So basically there is a huge requirement, but not many people who can take on such roles. What can we do collectively to reach to that level?
Well, first of all, Anindita, I would not agree that there are not enough qualified women, because that you have to look for them. You can't expect them to come and land in your lap and waiting there to just come in. You have to look for them, number one. Number two, there is now legislation around it, right? So what has happened is that it kind of now has started driving a tokenism, which probably is not the best way of getting talent to be representative on a board, right? Because the Ministry of Corporate Affairs has now made it mandatory that if you are a company of a particular size, you must have a woman director on the board. So these are two conflicting signals that actually come into the environment. So you are caught in this, cleft stick where you are, okay, I need a woman director. So let me find somebody I know. Because in India, what has happened is, although the IICA is trying to professionalize this by saying, okay, all directors need to register, then we'll have a pool of directors and then people can choose. It's not happening. People want comfort at the board level. So they end up choosing people they know, right? Which may or may not be the best way of doing this. So I think there needs to be an identification process of women at a particular level who can, because of their knowledge, their experience and their skills, serve as directors and not as a token sitting there as independent woman director, because that's really derogatory, right? That's one. Two, there must be some understanding of the fact that if you want a woman director on your board, then they have to be qualified enough to be there and not be there just to tick a box. So I don't agree with the fact that there aren't enough women. There are enough women, but there has to be a process put in place to ensure that this is not done as a tick box exercise, but is done in a more professional way to ensure that the right sort of person gets represented in boardrooms. And just from my own personal experience, another is really funny. So when I joined MFIN, I was probably the only woman there, right? And so this whole thing came in that there should be a woman director. And they're like, you're there? I said, no, I'm not. You have to find another one. So yeah, just say.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much. Shloka, the next one has come in for you. Women tend to judge other women quite harshly. And as you mentioned earlier, everybody has these insidious biases. So what are some of the excellent, scalable, replicatable models to create an environment where women can support each other? How do we as women deal with our own biases to support other women before we judge?
It's a great question. I think some of what I'd mentioned earlier about just being able to sort of acknowledge your own biases is a big step forward. So being able to sort of accept, firstly, even though you may think that you are one of the most sort of gender aware individuals, and that you are someone who really is very sort of focused on equality in the workplace, you'd also be surprised as to how much sort of insidious bias like just seeps into our everyday thought processes, and how sort of conditioned we are by society and the things we're told. So I think one of the most important steps you can take as an individual, and then of course to sort of incorporate that institutionally as an organizational culture, is to accept that there are biases inherent in the way we look at the world. And if you can accept that, you can then start correcting it. You can then make sure that there are corrective measures in place. So one thing, for instance, that I feel really strongly about, and is one of the sort of most basic forms of gender discrimination at an organizational level, is asking for a previous salary. And the reason that this tends to be so sort of skewed against women is because women who are not at equal pay with men, if that is something that's been set in from their previous jobs, it's just a form of discrimination that continues and continues and continues. So one aspect from an organizational perspective as well is, can we start moving to sort of change policies that inherently don't support women in the right ways? The second is, how do we kind of create space for women to be able to feel like they can, speak their mind and share, whatever their sort of problems may be in the workplace, there is a huge sort of discrepancy in the fact that, again, a lot of the peer-to-peer sort of relationships that have been set up are gender biased. Men tend to seek out other men within the workplace as colleagues. And if you're in a work environment where there just are, more men, in that particular industry or sector or organization that you work in, it's hard for women who feel more isolated to sort of be able to talk about, their issues at work. I mean, Mautushi gave you a great example of the classic post-work drink. It's just such a sort of institution, that you will find across all sort of organizations. And most women I know have the same story again and again. So what they've started doing is finding support networks outside of work. And I think that's played a large role in, helping women feel like they can talk about their professional growth and their, professional concerns in an environment that feels safe. And I think that's something that we can definitely bring into the workplace as well, and ensure that there are more safe spaces for women to feel like they are supported and encouraged and seen.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much, Shloka. We have a question for coming in for Anjali as well. 1 second. Anjali, in your opinion, who can take forward the leadership issues in the rural India at community institutions level? And what is the broader perspective of women leadership vision in rural India?
Yeah, I think it is very important to enroll the women sarpanches because they have come to the power, they have a political mandate. And but we have this term called sarpanch pati. So even though they have been elected, most of the work is done by their male counterparts. So that's a big 33% of women, and sometimes in some states it's more than 50, it's about 50%. So that's a big task force, who can take on the leadership role in the villages. And then there are other village level institutions, be it school management committee, which has again 50% of representation of women. Then there is village health sanitation committee. So there are representations of women everywhere. But it's so many places, it's on paper, so many times it is on paper. So civil society organization along with the government, I think they have a big mandate to mobilize this women so that they are able to perform their leadership role in a very effective manner. So it's all about collective leadership, and that's what we also do in our foundation. We have mechanisms and institutions where these women collectives are brought out. Then I think one of the panelists mentioned about the self-help groups, which are already created under National Livelihoods Mission. They have a clear mandate of women empowerment. So see, institutions and provisions are there. We need to really kindle that those institutions and trigger that leadership by mobilizing the women. Yeah.
Thank you. And we only have time for one last question. And Sonali, I would request you to please take this on. What is your opinion when a female candidate gets rejected for a particular position because there is relocation which is involved? And also, how easy or difficult is it for women to switch from the corporate setup to the development sector or vice versa?
So this question is really interesting, a little bit personal as well, because I made the shift myself from corporate to the development sector, but very early in the 2000s. So I used to be a business journalist for quite a long time in television, and made the transition for some really interesting reasons. So just to put it out there, how childcare was difficult, and I couldn't sort of straddle both worlds. I knew when I was leaving home, but never knew when I was coming back. Had my first child, my world turned upside down. And then subsequently sort of tripped into working for the sector. It wasn't something that was by design. And when I started working, I really didn't know what I was getting into, because I was a journalist, I had communication skills, very analytical, all of the good stuff, very ambitious, very competitive. all that goes with the turf. So when I joined this sector, I wasn't sure whether I was really looking at it as a long term, but then I made that shift. Money was an issue because you get paid much more in the corporate sector, and then you shift to the development sector, and that's one big thing. Now, of course, I think that's varied in the sector, because I've seen it change over the last 2 decades of how there has been corporatization of the sector as well. So there's lots of changes in the sector from when I began. And I really go with what Shloka said. When the first time a salary was offered to me, I felt, yeah, look at this sector, it's all about servicing and there is so much need. So whatever was given to us, it's fine. But then I realized that even within the sector, there is, that you can demand more. Yeah, it's not just about whatever's given to you, it's okay. Because even within the sector, there is, again, biases. Yeah, so it was really an interesting learning and a very interesting journey in leadership. But when I look back, I think this is probably the best thing I ever did, because I can sleep well. I somehow, when I close the day, there are many needs, but I mean, just the level of just doing what I do keeps me going. And I think it's been the best decision that I've ever taken. And just to say that we can make the transition, bring that professionalism in. I think it's not that the development sector is not professional, it doesn't work meticulously, planning, everything is there. So it's like, you need all of that, and it's something that really works. So I think the transition is completely possible. It's very exciting. And after making that transition myself, I highly recommend it to men and women. I still remember doing an interview of the talent requirement in the sector. I remember this was an Economics Time interview, and they asked me, what are some of the biggest challenges? I said, this sector is starved for talent because just sometimes we can't afford it. So, how can we encourage that talent that's nurtured many a times in the corporate sector that pays better, because, young people have so many hopes, maybe student loans. So, how do you then bring that talent to the sector? I think that's a core, because this sector needs talent and needs it desperately. So one of the things in leadership, I think for all of us, is to attract that talent, to really nurture that talent and make it available, because, I mean, just see what we are facing today as we sort of go through phases of unlocking and the colossal need that has to be met. It's a private sector has to respond, but this sector, what we call the social sector, has to respond even harder. So we need that talent. And I think however we can attract it. So Anandita, just to say, I don't know whether I answered your question adequately, or maybe just one part of that question, but it's really important for us to sort of understand the sector and bring in professionalism, bring in goal-orientedness, and all of that, all the good stuff that is required to see the impact. And nowadays we use all the fabulous language, ROI, return on investment, targets, name it. So, I'm just concluding my annual plans, and I have to tell all my team members, where's the ROI? What's your target? Even your KPIs, KRAs for the year. So, we sort of do all that as well. So just to bring that home to everyone.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much. And with this, we actually come to the close of today's session. Thank you to the audience for being so patient and for listening in. We have, once again, I would like to extend a very big vote of thanks to all of our panelists for shedding light on some of the most pressing issues that we are facing today. And we look forward to seeing everybody here next month with another exciting topic. We've today heard from some of the most outstanding thought leaders on how their journey has been and in what ways they are working towards and contributing to breaking the glass ceiling on gender and diversity. And we hope that you've also found this session to be very informative. And thank you so much for joining in. You can check out the recording of today's session on our LinkedIn and our YouTube page. Have a great day, and thank you once again.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anandita. That was really helpful.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. See you. Bye. Bye.